So today we have a very surprising Star Wars update. It's not the first time I'm talking about this specific topic, but it is the first time I have some concrete, hard evidence, and it comes from Lucasfilm themselves in broad daylight on StarWars.com. Lucasfilm just admitted what I suspected for months and months, that the original story for the Acolyte was scrapped, it was messed around with, and it was changed. And so the final product, the show that we all saw last year, has very little to do with the original story pitch by Leslye Headland. And the proof comes in the form of new screenshots for the Art of the Acolyte book. This past weekend was New York Comic Con, and Lucasfilm's publishing panel gave us a plethora of books and comics. A Jar Jar Binks comic, which I spoke about in my last video, a sequel novel, a young romance novel, and the art of several projects. But when Star Wars fans looked at the preview for this book, alarm bells started going off in our heads, because we looked at these photos and we said, hang on a minute, we didn't see any of this in the show. What in the world is going on? And then I remembered some of the original leaks, the ones that circulated around the internet in 2022, 2023, before we knew anything about the show. And amazingly, it's not that those leaks were wrong, it's that they were for the wrong version of the Acolyte. They were leaks for a version that no longer exists. One of the earliest drafts, when Leslye Headland had a 3-season plan. And incredibly, my friends, that story doesn't even resemble the one you saw. And it makes you wonder, was there so much studio interference from Lucasfilm and Disney that the series we got is not even closely related to the one that Leslye Headland had originally written, the one that she pitched to Kathleen Kennedy? And I have alluded to this being the case on a couple of separate occasions. Think back to the video I made talking about Dave Filoni and his influence on the Acolyte. And another major red flag is the way Leslye originally described the show 3 or 4 years ago versus some of the things she said in interviews after the show released. She originally described the Acolyte as Kill Bill meets Frozen, but again, after all 8 episodes came out, fans took a look at the series and said, how in the world did she get Kill Bill from this? And it's also why when the show came out, I made so many crazy theories. I don't know if you guys remember this, and I know that some of you weren't following me back then, but I was making crazy theory videos trying to make these connections work, finding similarities in between Elsa and Anna, and focusing on the more psychological elements of sisterhood. And I was constantly talking about Darth Plagueis. He did eventually make it into the show, but the original leaks talked about him as if he was going to be a major character throughout, and not just a brief cameo behind a rock. We heard about the planet of Scipio, we heard about Old Republic flashbacks, and as far as we understand it, Chimera was not the only Sith, or not the only dark side user in the show. There was originally going to be a wealthy man in his 50s with grey hair, whose codename was Paul. Now you might argue that concept art is always going to be different to the final product, that visual interpretations of scenes do change, visual effects can differ between concept stage and post-production, but as you're going to see in just a moment, these photos are so different, there is absolutely no way they reflect any scenes from the 2024 Disney Plus show. So here we have troopers infiltrating a village. It kind of looks like Canto Bight, but keep in mind, my friends, this is a century before the Phantom Menace, the waning years of the High Republic. This is some kind of underground or criminal militia. According to the Art of book, they're known as the Haldoran Warriors, a group whose name we have never heard once, that was not spoken a single time. But like I say, my friends, in the original Acolyte plot rumours, these do match a separate group. BestSpinBulletin.com documented this back in August of 2022. They're not the original source, but they worded it best. They put the leaks into a concise document, and they said this. On the new planet of Sanshiro, there is a village that often gets attacked by primitive and tribal beings. The Jedi supposedly come and protect the villagers from these attacks, but in exchange for their protection, the Jedi take 4 sensitive children from the camp to train them. And after the attack you see in this concept photo, the Jedi decide to take one of the twins, who was originally codenamed Miri. At some point, the village is attacked again, but the Jedi arrive too late, and the grandfather of the sisters, whose name is Theo, dies. And this is what spurs the other twin, whose codename was Aura, to demand the Jedi take her to see Miri, but they refuse on the basis of emotional attachment. And so to cut a long story short, Aura turns to the dark side. She joins a group of acolytes who who are vying for their master's attention to become the one apprentice under the rule of two. And this is when Aura makes friends with a character called Pen. That's his codename. He's an alien, not a human, but a dark and mysterious character who is rumored to have come to life through CG. I wonder if this was going to be Plagueis. Now this is where the leaks kind of divert into multiple paths. There was a lot of disagreement on what happened next. One of the sources said that both Aura and Pen worked together to defeat the other acolytes. There was a bit of uncertainty about who was the real Sith. Was it the human with grey hair called Paul, or was it going to be the CG alien called Pen? But one major plot point, which to be fair the final show also gave us, was a showdown between the twins, May and Osha. But in some of the original leaks, one of them was meant to be a Jedi and the other one a Sith. I guess some of that did translate in the final version. Osha was light side and May was the apprentice of Chimera. But in the end, they kind of switch places. Not exactly, but Osha becomes the Acolyte after killing Master Sol, and May is brainwashed after leaving her master. But in one of the original concepts, things were going to be slightly different. The twins were going to face off as fully trained Jedi and Acolyte of the Sith. The version you see on screen is very different. Other differences in these concepts are certain planets and their names. The art of the Acolyte names a planet called Anisham. I suppose it does share some similarities to Olega, but as you can see from this visual depiction, it was going to be very, very different. And so between this stuff and the recent revelation that Chimera was originally meant to be the first Knight of Ren, as a Star Wars fan who was so excited before this show dropped, it just renders me extremely frustrated. And it's not just a case of missed opportunities, it just makes me think, what other amazing concepts did they scrap? And why? What was the agenda behind this? I honestly don't know what to say, guys, but the art of the Acolyte book is going to expose so much. And in a way, I interpret this as Lucasfilm just putting their cards on the table and saying, look, this is what we were originally going to do. I believe that's the way they're going to spin it. And I think they're going to explain why changes were made, because these concepts come from an early chapter titled The Pitch. So I imagine they're going to elaborate on the full creative process, from the very first meetings with Kathleen Kennedy, right up to the end. Studio overreach, higher-ups dictating things, can really damage a project. And even in what I've said today, there is a lot of hearsay. We're taking a lot of assumptions for granted, which might have not been the case. It might be even worse. There might be things we're never going to learn about. But there you go, my friends. The Acolyte is what it was, overpriced, controversial, divisive, and for a show that was poised to be the first ever Sith-oriented series, it left a very sour taste in our mouths. But what do you think? How do you interpret these photos? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, my friends, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and may the Force be with you always.